Time and Tide by Misdemeanor1331. Chapter 3. The afternoon trudged forward, the light rays growing longer as they slanted through the gap in Draco's bedroom curtains. The silence had persisted as well. Draco's chosen, Hermione's cursed. Her shoulder muscles had locked after the first hour or two, her hands going numb from the restraints. She wasn't a healer and didn't know much about the subject beyond field triage. She tried in vain to remember how long blood needed to be restricted from an area before permanent damage was done. Surely longer than an afternoon, or so she hoped. Draco came and went as he pleased. When he was in the room with her, he spent his time reading. Left 6 times, 4 to refill his water glass from the kitchen faucet, twice to use the loo. Hermione fidgeted, feeling pressure build in her pelvis. Dehydration went hand in glove with her line of work, and Draco hadn't exactly been accommodating. However, there were anatomical limits to her bladder's endurance. Limits that, as light turned to shadow and the sun dipped below the tree line, they now needed to address. Hermione tried to speak, but Draco's curse was well cast. She leaned forward to capture his attention and mouthed her request. His eyebrows pulled together, confused. She tried again, slower, but had apparently already exhausted the short runway of his patient. He ended the silencio with a flick. "Hello," she said, her voice a raspy whisper. He considered a moment before answering, "No." "Make me mate watch longer, and it's not going to be a choice." Draco's lip curled in disgust. Unearned, it wasn't her fault that he hadn't thought this through. She sneered right back. "Perhaps you should have considered this before taking me prisoner. Awfully mouthy for needing something from me. Awfully stubborn for a man who doesn't want his room to smell like urine." Draco clenched his jaw. "Fine, up." She pressed herself against the wall, levering herself to standing while Draco moved past her to open the door. "Malfoy?" He looked over at her, a question in his eyes. "I need my arms free." Understanding dawned, followed by a parade of regret, embarrassment, and discomfort. Nevertheless, he freed Hermione's wrist with a flick of his wand. He'd experienced pain before, cuts and bruises, a variety of hexes, the Cruciatus curse expertly cast by Lord Voldemort's most feared headswoman, Bellatrix Lestrange. This was just as bad. Knives of fire lanced through her shoulders and up her back as she brought her arms forward. Each motion sent a sharp spike of pain into her neck and down her sides. Soon after, the tingling started, though at first almost pleasant, tickling from shoulder to elbow. Then faster, harder, hundreds of needles stabbing into her skin as her nerves came back to life. She sagged against the wall, her eyes shut against the tears, bottom lip pressed between her teeth so that she wouldn't cry out. She forced movement into her fingers. They were stiff and clumsy, but thankfully still functioning. She swiped her eyes with the sleeves of her jumper and chanced to look at Draco. His expression was shuttered, despite her red-rimmed eyes. He had either become entirely apathetic or had mastered the art of suppressing empathy. It was impossible to tell. His eyebrows rose in a silent question, and she nodded. "I'm okay," she said. Not that he cared. Draco opened the door and stepped into the hallway. He faced Rawle's room, one half raised, though his colleague's snores were still audible. "Don't be long," he hissed as she darted past him and into the water closet. Hermione locked the door behind her, satisfied to hear the click, even though security was an illusion. He could unlock it with a flick of his wand if she tarried, but she didn't care. After being rendered unconscious, beaten, and bound, she planned to take her time. She satisfied biology and stood at the sink to tap on high. She cupped water to her mouth greedily, drinking until she wasn't thirsty, and then drinking more to guarantee another opportunity to visit the loo. Her cheek had bruised from Draco's fist, the corner of her mouth swollen and torn from the impact. She rinsed her face with cold water, letting her skin air dry instead of using the dingy towel that hung limp and threadbare from the towel bar. She stripped down to her camisole and washed beneath her arms. She considered going further. Draco might allow her to use the facilities, but there was no guarantee of a shower. Before she could do more than unbutton her denims, a sound shifted over the faucet's rush. Rawls' snores had ceased. Hermione closed the tab and reached for the door just as Draco opened it. His grey eyes were wide with panic. "Go!" he ordered, low and urgent. "Now!" But it was too late. Rawls' door opened. The Death Eater stood bare-chested in the hallway, his yellowed briefs sagging low beneath his pot-belly, which was covered in weary blonde hair. He had his wand casually in one hand and scratched his ear with the other. Hermione froze. Their eyes met. It took a moment to register. Then Rawls' mouth twisted into a snarl. "Well, shite!" Draco said with an aggrieved sigh. Rawls raised his wand, the syllables of the killing curse on his tongue, but Draco was faster. He cast casually, vocalized the spell as if it meant nothing, as if it cost him nothing. Avada Kedavra! Bright green light filled the small hallway. Hermione felt a moment of breathlessness, gasping as if all the oxygen had been sucked from the house. She pressed her back against the wall and watched as Rawls stood, wand extended, suspended for a brief moment before falling backward. His stomach turned as the stiff bones of his neck broke upon his collision with the floor. His face was still contorted in the awkward grimace of a half-spoken spell. Nothing in his expression indicated surprise. He hadn't realized what Draco had been about to cast. He'd underestimated his housemaid. As had she. Draco met her eyes over the space of the hallway, and Hermione felt her blood turn to ice. She'd thought she'd known this boy. She'd taken his measure at Hogwarts and had assumed that those proportions hadn't changed. But the schoolyard bully of her past had been replaced by a cold, dead-eyed stranger. She hadn't realized how much danger she'd been in, beneath his hands and at his mercy for an entire afternoon. She had gambled with her life on outdated information, had acted flippant and careless on a deeply incorrect assumption. She couldn't make that mistake again, not if she wanted to live through whatever came next. Hermione dropped her eyes to the floor, playing for time as she readjusted her expectations. Hopefully, showing him deference would keep him from turning his wand on her next. "We don't have much time now," Draco said. "Rawls was largely useless, but they'll be expecting him to check in at the start of his patrol." "When is that?" Hermione tried to keep her voice steady. If Draco heard the tremble, he didn't comment on it. Instead, he checked his watch. "It's 7 p.m. now," he said. "Rawls' rounds start at 9, which means we have at least until 10 before they come knocking. We need to be long gone by then." This caught her attention. She shot him a confused look. "Gone?" "The Dark Lord has strict rules about murdering each other," he said with brutal humor. "I don't fancy losing an eye or testicle or whatever other body part my dear old aunt decides I can live without, especially not over him." Draco tilted his chin derisively towards Rawls' corpse. Hermione could barely look at it without her gorge rising. Her throat worked in a suppressive swallow. "You could let me go." Draco raised an eyebrow. She sensed the folly of the proposition, but she had to try. "We never saw each other. I don't know what happened to Rawls. I don't know the location of the safe house. You haven't given away anything, and I—" "And you're once again failing to appreciate your circumstances," Draco interrupted. "In my organization," he drawled the word, deeply sarcastic, "advancement is individually earned and merit-based. Prove your worth, your use, and reap the reward. You, Granger, you would have earned me quite the reward. Capturing you without Rawls' assistance, smuggling you in and out of our safe house without his knowledge." He trailed off, eyes shining with the potential of it. "I could have named my price. Promotion. Reassignment. My freedom." The shine in his eyes faded. "But Rawls is dead," he continued, "and I killed him. Your capture, firmly my reason for my advancement, is not the only thing that might save us from punishment, provided you're used correctly. You've turned from a pawn into a bargaining chip, one I intend to use to my full advantage." He forced a smile, a lupine grin that made the hair on the back of Hermione's neck stand on end. But he'd slipped. "Us," he'd said. This Draco might have been different from the one she'd known at Hogwarts, but but she doubted he'd allow more people into his inner circle. Historically, there were only 2 people that Draco cared about more than himself: his parents. This squared with the Order's scant intelligence. The Malfoy family had been leveraged against itself for years. Lord Voldemort's gains were stacked high against the family's many losses, financial, reputational, and otherwise. This was information she could use. Your organization doesn't need to know. Escape looked less likely by the moment, but she had nothing to lose by attempting to bargain. We could transfigure his body, hide the corpse. Draco shook his head. A priori incantatem would implicate me. The spell is cast, and we've wasted. He consulted his watch again. 3 minutes. He looked up at her. I can bind you, or you can help us both. Your choice. Hermione took a deep breath. She did not need to consider. If escape wasn't possible now, maybe it would be later. Whenever her chance came, she needed her hands free for it. The logic steadied her. Draco didn't want to be caught by the Death Eaters any more than she did. Their immediate circumstances made them allies. She could work with that. What do you need me to do? Draco disappeared into his bedroom and, after a moment of rummaging, returned clutching a tactical nylon backpack. It had 3 pockets of descending size, several sturdy loops, a side pouch of netted nylon, and was dappled with the black and grey of nighttime shadows. He undid the zips and charmed it with a series of silent spells. He recognized the motions: an undetectable extension charm to increase its capacity, a featherlight charm so that they could stuff it full without feeling its weight. She had cast the same 2 on her drawstring bag. Then he cast a 3rd charm, one she'd never seen. She hesitated when he held it out for her. It doesn't bite, he grumbled, giving the bag a shake. She frowned and took it by the straps, handling it gingerly. She didn't trust spells she didn't recognize. Food and water, Draco said. Clear the cabinets of whatever you can find. We'll be traveling on foot. Her brow furrowed. Not apparating. No. Disappeared back into his room. She stared after him, watching as he dumped the contents of her pack onto the floor. The skin of her left thigh and right shoulder tingled where he touched the sealskin, moving it to the side as he began to repack her bag with the same care she typically applied. He looked up at her, eyebrows raised. Unless you'd prefer to stay. I can't say I like our odds, but I can guarantee your outcome would be measurably worse than mine. She scowled and bit back a retort. And he was right. Every minute of delay was a minute they could have spent putting distance between them and the enemy. Hermione edged past Ron's corpse, keeping her back pressed against the wall and her eyes trained on the body. Irrational fear picked at her, old, unsubstantiated rumors of Lord Voldemort's inferior army nudging her into a mild panic. The water she drank sat uneasy in her stomach. She swallowed it down and tried to focus on the next step. The kitchen's cupboards were mostly bare. She took inventory on the kitchen table. 1 bag of rice, mostly full. 3 tins of beans. 5 of pre-cooked sausage. 2 of sweet corn. A half a loaf of stale bread. A wedge of cheese she'd found covered on the counter, tolerably mouldy once she'd scraped off the bits covered in blue fuzz. The icebox held no fresh food. No vegetables or eggs. Just a carton of old milk and some rainbow-sheened meat that she didn't bother taking. The freezer contained a mostly full bottle of gin, and she found an unopened bottle of whiskey in the topmost cupboard. Small cooking pot, a chipped wooden spoon, a container of salt, and 2 sets of utensils rounded out their collection of kitchen goods that were destined for the backpack. One of her foraged items would stay with her. A utility knife, the only one she'd found in their bare-bones kitchen. 4 inches long, bent at the tip, and dull against the skin of her thumb. Nicked steel was better than nothing. With a wary look over her shoulder, Hermione slipped it into her waistband, making sure it was secure against her hip before lowering her shirt over it. She finished packing her bag just as Draco stepped over Ron's body. Another shiver worked its way down Hermione's neck. He hadn't given it a second look. Ready? He readjusted her pack across his shoulders. It was too small for him. The nylon drawstrings bunched near the collar of his coat, and the pack sat high up on his back. Do you want to switch? She asked, offering him the backpack and trying for innocence. He gave her a deadpan knock, unconvinced. "Let's go." "Wait, I need to know. My wand and my cloak. You have them?" He paused to look at her, assessing her for weakness, or tell. He schooled her features into the run-of-the-mill worry any witch would feel without her wand. His eyes relaxed. Hermione was pretty sure she had passed. "I have them," he answered. "Not like I'll ever see them again." He brushed past her, and Hermione felt the warm steel against the outside of her thigh. Hermione didn't want to kill him. She didn't want to kill anybody. Yes, she'd done terrible things in support of this war. She'd lied and stolen. She'd hurt people, some who might have deserved it and some who might not have. Those deeds weighed heavy on her conscience, haunted her, when the sea rushed cold beneath her and the sky stretched wide above, when her only companions were unanswerable questions on philosophy and mortality. However, if hurting him meant getting her wand and sealskin back, then she would. She had to. First inhale of outside air cleared the thick smell of death from her nose. Instead, she smelled the sea. True to Draco's word, Moira Firth was in sight, spreading like dark glass beyond the prickly field of cut wheat. She felt a pang of homesickness. Sea was the closest thing she had to belonging. The idea of travelling overland after spending most of her time in the ocean felt foreign and unwelcome. To be travelling with a partner, even more so. Draco turned west at the end of a short drive, walking them down a paved road. There shone in the setting sun as lustrous as gold. As if he'd heard her thought, he lifted his hood, extinguishing the glow. "Here's how it's going to work," he said, speaking quietly. "Our destination is over 500 miles away. We're walking the whole way." "Can't you apparate?" He sent her a sideways scowl. "You already asked that." "And you didn't answer." "What makes you think I will this time?" 500 miles, she repeated. "Average walking pace is 3 miles per hour. That makes a travel time of approximately 166 hours, with 8 hours of rest per day." 6, Draco corrected. Hermione suppressed her skepticism. She would have bet what little remained of her muggle money that she'd travelled farther than Draco in the past 7 years. She knew body's limits, how much a human could endure without significant rest. Draco thought they could walk 18 hours while sleeping 6, then fine. To let him discover those limits for himself and steal away with her pack while he was sunk into a deep sleep, near delirious from exhaustion. Fine. Did some quick mental math. "We'll be walking for about 10 days. You expect to pass them in silence?" Another sideway look. "Is it too much to hope?" She blinked, his bitter humour once again surprising her. "At least tell me where we're headed." "No." 500 miles overland. We're heading west now, but I'm sure we'll turn south eventually. Is it world?" He rounded on her, arm raised for backhand slap. She flinched, stumbling back over her own feet. "Be quiet!" His eyes flashed in a low light. "You're a spy," he continued on a growl. "The less you know, the less of a liability you are." "Why would it matter?" "Did I not make myself clear? We're going to be hunted, Granger, both of us. And our only chance of safety is a week and a half to the south. We can get through together, or you can fight me at every step. Which do you prefer?" Hermione's lips flattened into a line as Draco's expression shifted, becoming unbearably smug. "Say it." Draco stepped closer. You could smell the sea in his body, a combination of salt and spice that made her want to run. To dive into the ocean and never stop swimming, even as he angered them inland. They both knew the correct answer, the only answer that gave her a fraction of a chance and spared him from whatever torture his aunt could invent. "Together," she managed from between clenched teeth. He considered her for a long moment, as if weighing the sincerity of her words. Finally, he nodded. "Good. Now shut up and follow me." To be continued. Thank you for listening to this chapter of Time and Tide by Misdemeanor1331. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.